There has been just so much that's been happening from the world of fintech right across the globe that your friendly fintech chronicler, myself, Kamalika, has decided to start a new series of podcasts. And here, every week, we'll catch up on the latest happening in bite sized format. So let's get started. First off, with the fintech news that's coming in from India. And the first news that we have is that transaction volumes on credit via UPI is set to reach $1 trillion by 2030. And this is a bet that Zeta is willing to place with their credit as a service product for banks. Zeta aims to capture at least 50% of that market share in the future. In the early days of UPI, especially as it started to scale, it added a lot of pressure on banks' core banking system. That is the problem statement Zeta aims to solve with their pre-integrated systems, which can streamline operational efficiencies. Zeta's cloud-native next-generation core banking and digital payments platform would allow banks to handle digital credit processing right from origination all the way to collections. Next up, traveling to Sri Lanka. You don't want to carry cash with you anymore because PhonePe has you covered with their recently launched UPI payments for Indian travelers to Sri Lanka. Remember Orbo or Shark Tank fame? The startup which was using AI for their beauty stack and giving insights about facial attributes, skin tones, and various other anomalies. And the promise was to help brands recommend hyper personalized beauty products for you. Well, they were in the news recently, and no, it was not because they were turning down the shark investments, considering they did have a lot of pre existing investors already on board. But, anyways, they recently announced selling Superscan to a listed fintech, Neogen. And Superscan is their AI powered document imaging, automation, and fraud detection platform. And they are going to sell this off in order to focus on their beauty and personal care segment alone. The reason? What every one of us fintech builders knew about all along. The long wait times, which are sometimes 3 to 6 months long to onboard new BFSI clients, thanks to the complex and ever-changing regulatory and compliance rules. Neogen plans to consume and monetize this solution within their partner networks, reduce the KYC cost, as well as empower and streamline their credit infrastructure. Now, the fourth news is about what all of us Indians love: food. And this is not just me saying it. ONDC, or the Open Network for Digital Commerce, a decentralized protocol for e-commerce, mobility, and other kinds of transaction, recently had their April reporting coming in. And according to it, food is the number one category that Indians spend on. By the way, since 2022, when it saw like a tepid response to its launch, it's grown to about 436% in transaction volumes within just a quarter. Food and mobility, especially thanks to Namayatri's auto rickshaw rides, are gaining popularity very fast. Grocery orders have also grown about 52% quarter on quarter in the period from Jan to currently, with a supply of 6.5 million stock keeping units. But as an e-com veteran would tell you, margins from these lines of business is generally razor thin. What does drive money? Electronics and fashion. Both of these are categories in which ONDC has not seen much of an uptick. Besides, food delivery is relatively easy to execute due to its habit-forming nature and high purchase frequencies. The steep discounts that the government has been funding has definitely helped. But pricing aside, the other aspect that ONDC really needs to fix before consumers can trust it is to go the extra mile and, well, win consumer trust. Meanwhile, I think I shall continue to enjoy the incentive programs that ONDC has recently launched just last week. Coming to the fifth news is about an IPO, which is that of GoDigit, which is all set for a great public listing. And on the second day, which is when we're recording, 79% of its scripts have already been subscribed to. And just ahead of its Thursday, it announced rupees 1,176 crores, which is being raised from anchor investors such as Fidelity, Goldman, ADIA, and Custody Bank. The IPO, which has an offer for sale of, a fresh issue of 1,125 crores rupees and has an offer for sale of about 47 million shares by their existing investors. The money that is being raised, the fresh issues, will go towards augmenting their capital base and maintaining the solvency level. Next up, who should regulate crypto in India? If one answers that question well, then we could very well predict a lot more about the future of crypto markets in India. Why? Because recently, SEBI said that they recommend oversight of crypto trades, whereas we all know how RBI feels about cryptocurrencies, most of the time calling them as baseless instruments used for terrorist financing and money laundering. Now, rumor has it that both these institutions, RBI and SEBI, have submitted their proposals to the Ministry of Finance on a framework for regulating the rising digital asset class. In 2021, the government prepared a bill that would have effectively banned private cryptocurrencies, though that bill has not yet been formally introduced and tabled in the parliament. Last year, when India was the president of the G20, India did call for a global framework for regulating such new age digital assets like cryptocurrencies. While RBI is still all for banning cryptocurrency, SEBI recommended different regulators should oversee activities that are linked to cryptocurrencies that fall under their domain, and that a single unified regulator for digital assets should be avoided. SEBI said it could monitor cryptocurrencies that take the form of securities as well as what we also known as the initial coin offerings or the ICOs. It could also issue licenses for equity market related products, and also recommended that grievances of investors trading in cryptocurrencies should be resolved under the Indian Consumer Protection Act. Next up, right after I managed to record my podcast for the spectacular quarterly earning of PB Fintech, I read about their top management offloading significant stakes in the company. The CEO, Yashish Dahiya, is said to be selling 54 lakh stocks of his. The vice chair, Alok Bansal, another 29 lakh shares via block deals. Now, as per a report, the offer size for the stake is said to be around 1,053 crore at a floor price of 1,258 rupees per share. This sale is apparently to make tax payments on current and future ESOP exercises. I can't say I quite understand, but the timing could not have been more appropriate. With the MSCI's inclusion, this stock price is set to see at least $238 million of inflow in the coming year. For more details, you may want to head to my original link on the entire PB Fintech quarterly earnings. Anyways, talking about the MSCI, Paytm was recently removed from this index, given the string of bad news that have been associated with it and the ongoing decline in their market cap, which has more than halved to about $2.6 billion now. In yet another case of Ghar Wapasi, we saw Groww shift their domicile to India. Next up, the bullish markets have had mutual fund houses put in close to about 2.9 trillion rupees across 27 companies. HDFC Bank took the lead, with its mutual fund increasing stakes from 16.28 in FY22 to 23.17 in FY24, marking an impressive 1.2 trillion rupees and increasing holdings by 6.9 percentage points. Reliance Industry also witnessed a robust increase, with mutual fund holding rising from 5.2 to 7.5% during this period, which translates to an additional investment of 35,525 crores. Meanwhile, SEBI has been taking steps to ease the process for new investors to get into the mutual fund industry. First was by removing the mandate for PAN Aadhaar linking for letting fresh purchases go through. And if your KYC status is on hold, you can still make partial withdrawals of your fund in an emergency situation. And finally, SEBI is also allowed for guys without their Aadhaar cards to start investing in the Indian markets. Next up, we have many sponsors and investment managers, particularly those who are looking to raise for capital, thinking about investing in alternate investment funds in India due to regulatory uncertainties and high costs. So one particular person, Siddharth Shah from Ketan & Co., says that tighter regulations are affecting alternate investment funds or AIFs and making managers worry about the regulatory stability of it. So managers who want to raise a lot of offshore capital are thinking about moving their base outside of India. Recently, a regulatory note has made investors also a little nervous. It questions the FDI or foreign direct investment policies around AIF. The Reserve Bank of India suggests treating investments by non-residents exceeding 50% of AI unit as an indirect foreign investment. This is a big change from the 2015 time when regulations were changed to allow AIFs to make foreign capital or to take in foreign capital automatically. This was done to encourage Indian fund managers to move back to India. While offshore funds benefit from more stable regulatory regime, tax considerations also need to be kept in mind. Gift City is seen as a good alternative for managers because it has a certain regulatory stability, there are tax benefits, and of course, closeness to India. However, AIFs in India will still be needed if funds are being raised from Indian investors. Also, some Indian managers, especially those in their 40s or 50s, might not want to move overseas. AIF industry has grown rapidly in the last 5 commitments amounting to 10.8 lakh crores and 3.8 lakh crores respectively as of December 31, 2023. And finally, we saw a case of a bank heist of about 6 crores where the fraudsters used Razorpay to execute all of their frauds. Moving on to news from Asia. The first is about everyone in the payment industry that's working towards the same goal, making cross-border payments as simple as an email or SMS. But the approach that Bank of Thailand has taken is definitely worthy of a discussion. It's playing an important role in realizing this ambition by first bilateral tie-ups with neighboring countries and now by trying to figure out how to create standards for the entire world. The goal is to create multiple competitive systems for making small value payments as simple as possible. One competitor that they're helping to build is known as Project Nexus, an agreement among 5 Southeast Asian nations to knit their domestic infrastructure into a single operable standard. The Thai QR-based payment standards, PromptPay, is now synced with Singapore's PayNow, and it is now in talks with UPI from India to set up the same capabilities with us. Next up, from Asia, grabbing their way onto profitability, Grab's first quarter 2024 revenue grew 24% year-on-year to $653 million, which the company attributed to growth across all segments. Grab's adjusted core profits hit a record of $62 million. The company updated its full year 2024 adjusted core profits from a range of 180 to 200 millions to a range of 250 to 270 million. Grab executives are also betting that new initiatives, including their digital banking initiative, will increase the company's earnings going forward. Alternative data sources offer a broader view of the organization's financial health and can help lenders make more accurate and predictive credit decisions by providing additional insights into their financial behavior, payment patterns, and risk factors. Data, all of which Grab is known to have in troves. Next up, International Finance Corporation, or IFC, announced on Wednesday that it has provided a $30 million loan to Mbank, Mongolia's first digitally focused bank, in order to help them increase their digital lending to women and small businesses in the country. Then we have buy now, pay laters are facing kind of a dichotomy. Are they helping to increase access to credit, or are they increasing the debt burden? Because buy now, pay later schemes in Indonesia are increasing consumer debt and are driven by greater ease of access and growing popularity of such services. Consumer debt incurred through these BNPL schemes rose to about 6.13 trillion rupiah, or $382 million as of March 2024. And this is a 23.9% increase from the same period a year ago. This is according to data from Financial Services Authority. But as we've seen from the US, this can be dangerous, with nearly half of the households in the US that belong to the lower income bracket using BNPL for basic amenities like groceries. Moving on to the US and North America, if you're a bank that's planning to go fully digital, you may want to hold off, considering that consumer confidence happens to have reached its lowest level for digital-only banks. Digital-only banks like Ally, Capital One, and Discover have been taking a hit lately, especially with the pandemic pushing all of us online. A recent JD Power survey shows consumers aren't as happy with how these banks handle consumer complaints. Customer rated their satisfaction with digital-only checking accounts at a 688 out of 1,000, down 27 points from last year. Savings accounts scored 710, down 8 points. Top-rated banks such as Ally, Capital One, Discover, and Charles Schwab banks scored around a 702 to 743. The number of customers at digital banks seem to be rising though. 17% of checking customers at online-only bank were new, up from 12% last year. But these new customers said they're less likely to stick with the bank and don't feel a personal connect. In the long run, digital-only banks are still very competitive. According to JD Power, 37% of the consumers at traditional banks reported paying fees, compared to only 11% on digital-only banks. Next up, we have Mogo Incorporated, which is a company that deals with digital money and payments, which has just made changes to its existing loan agreement with Fortress Investment Group. This change means that the loan, which was originally supposed to pay back by July of 2025, now has to be paid back by Jan 2026. Greg Feller, who is the president and CFO of Mogo, said that they'd be happy to continue working with Fortress. He mentioned that Fortress has been a great financial partner for Mogo over the last 10 years, and also added that this loan agreement gives Mogo the resources and flexibility it needs for its digital lending products. Then is news from the regulators, or rather from CFPB, which is here to stay. The Supreme Court ruled on Thursday in a 7-2 opinion led by the conservative Justice Clarence Thomas that CFPB's funding is constitutional and does not violate the appropriation clause. The CFPB was sued in 2018 by 2 payday lending groups that challenged the Bureau's ability to issue the first federal payday lending rule, which was put on hold pending these 6 years of litigation. Now that the big case is over, Rohit Chopra, the director of CFPB, says that the Bureau is ready to go full steam ahead. They're really focused on going after financial firms that keep breaking the rules. They also want to make sure that big bosses who make the decisions are held responsible if something goes wrong. The Bureau is planning to hire 75 more people, including lawyers and investigators, paralegals, economists, etc., etc. This will bring their enforcement team up to about 275 people. Senior official at the bureau said that they'll have more people joining soon and they plan to keep hiring in the upcoming months. Just after their win at the Supreme Court, the bureau sued Solo Funds, an online lending platform based in Los Angeles. Bureau claims that Solo Funds trick borrowers with their total cost of loans while advertising zero interest or zero annualized percent rate on their loans. Chopra also mentioned that the Bureau is speeding up its action on certain rules. They're extending the deadline for small businesses, data collection rule, also known as the 1071. Some lenders had challenged this rule and it was put on hold by a court in Texas last year while they awaited for the Supreme Court's decision on the Bureau's funding. Bureau plans to issue a new rule to extend the deadlines for lenders who lend the most to small businesses to July 18, 2025 instead of October 1st, 2024. Lenders who lend less will have until early and late 2026 to comply. Now, there's been a lot of debate about whether earned wage access or EWA should be considered a loan or not. Fintech companies offering EWA are trying to stand out from payday lenders and cash advance services. A company, Reset, recently launched a card that lets people spend based on their earned wages. Users link their bank and payroll accounts to the Reset app. Despite some checks, signing up is pretty straightforward. Reset doesn't really charge interest or fees, they make money from merchant fees. After confirming the eligibility of the linked account, Reset will then go through a series of identity and know your customer checks, supported through API integrations with the platform Synctera, which also handles recording card transaction on Stern's ledgers. Unlike some cash advances or early wage access models that use historical bank data to support underwriting decision, Reset's version of earned wage access uses information gleaned directly from payroll providers by providing real-time insights into how much the consumer earns. Lawmakers at the state and federal level remain divided over whether or not earned wages actually classify as a loan and as such are under the governance of certain lending-focused requirements or not. Then we have MasterCard, which reduced their call center dispute volumes from 40 to 20%. How? GenAI, of course. MasterCard this week entered into a partnership with Salesforce, integrating Salesforce's financial services cloud with MasterCard's Dispute Resolution Center. MasterCard's new Salesforce collaboration follows a February upgrade at the card network to add more GenAI capability to the Dispute Resolution Center. This isn't the only AI-driven solution that the card network has, by the way. MasterCard's Ithaca Alert provides real-time notification to merchants when a financial institution reports a chargeback or a dispute, which now, with the Salesforce integration, can provide merchants with relevant customer transaction data. MasterCard and Salesforce hope to address what MasterCard says is a growing payment dispute problem. The number of chargebacks is expected to reach 337 million annually by 2026, which is a 42% increase from the 235 million in 2023. Despite an uncertain job market, many bankers believe fintechs are better positioned for their long-term career aspects. Except for this veteran fintech builder, Delia Pavalke recently joined Bank of America last week as the MD in payments and US banking risk in New York. She spent the last 7 years at Stripe, beginning in compliance before becoming the head of product risk. This marks Pavalke's return to banking, having spent 5 years at JP Morgan prior to this. Talking about Stripe, the fintech giant recently hit 95 billion in valuation after its latest fundraising round, where they raised $600 million. Stripe plans to use capital to invest in its European operations. Participants in this funding round include units of Alliance, SE, SA, Bailey Gifford, Fidelity Management, and the who's who, Sequoia Capital, and all of them. AeroPay, a digital payments provider for the cannabis industry, recently has successfully raised 20 million in Series B funding. The round was spearheaded in Los Angeles with the fintech venture capital firm Group 11. Notable contributors being Chicago Venture and Continental Investment Partners. The funding milestone arrives as AeroPay boasts an impressive tenfold increase in revenue over the past year, alongside managing $1 billion in transaction volumes annually. Moving on to news from South America, Australia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, basically the rest of the globe. World Bank has priced the first Swiss franc denominated digital bond issued by an international entity on May 15th. It will be settled using Swiss franc wholesale central bank digital currency provided by the Swiss National Bank. Bond, which is issued, will be worth around $220 million and will last 7 years, settling on June 11th, 2023. World Bank said that this is the largest Swiss franc denominated bond issued since 2009. The bond is mainly being placed in Switzerland with 60% allocated to banks and corporates. Institutional investors make up 10%, central banks and official institutions the rest. Consumers Bank is the sole lead manager as well as paying and issuer agent for this bond. Coupons and redemption payments will be made using tokenized CHF. However, unless the wholesale CBDC gets the formal green light, that might be tokenized CHF issued by SDX. That was the case before the Helvetia pilot. Moving on to UK, which has managed to pull its head out of a recession with a medium-term economy sluggishly recovering. Next, Liquidize, a fintech company that is creating a marketplace for private shares in Australia using blockchain technology. They're filling a gap that's left by traditional institutions that have paused their crypto projects. Liquidize, which is led by Andrew Ward, is using decentralized finance to solve the problem of liquidity. They are setting up a system for larger private companies and their shareholders to easily trade shares. By only allowing accredited investors and using DeFi protocols, they don't really need a market license, or so they claim. Watt says that by admitting only accredited investors using DeFi protocols, such as an automated market making, tokenization, and settlement process, the company doesn't need a market license. What it has is a managed investment scheme license for a cash pool that fuels the business and the registry's existing Know Your Customer systems. Claiming this is a smart move considering how all of this sounds pretty risky, and not to mention, most of it is highly unregulated. Next up, we have PPRO, a payments fintech in the UK, which recently raised 85 million pounds. And what do they plan to do with that? Expand to India, of course. PPRO's business model is to simplify cross-border payments for users of using their domestic payment rails. Now, in a country like India, which has capital controls, it's often difficult for local businesses or people to use credit cards and purchase goods and services on international platforms. Merchants have to complete hardest KYC, paperwork, and all of that in order to be approved. As a result, card transactions frequently up. These merchants can now readily access UPI because PPRO is meant to bridge that domestic card infrastructure to global credit card networks now. Next up, we have Flutterwave, a big fintech company in Nigeria, which stopped a hacking attempt in April. They say that no user funds or data were compromised, despite reports of a $7 million loss. Since then, they've boosted their security and are moving some customers to a safer platform. They're also working with others in the industry to tackle the common security challenges like enhancing Know Your Customer checks and balances, etc. This is the fourth breach in the last 14 months, but Flutterwave assures that most users won't be affected by these changes. Now, we have big news coming in from the Bank of Ghana. They've just completed the first test run of Project DESEFT, a big step towards cross-border payments. They use digital credentials like eSADI, a stablecoin from Singapore. The project, which started in June 2023 with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, is all about creating a trusted system for small and medium businesses. It turns important info like licenses and trade records into digital credentials that can be checked easily. The second phase, which finished in April 2024, saw successful trade between Ghana and Singapore using DESFT solution, a universal trusted credential, a Singapore stablecoin, the eSADI, and the Purpose Moneybound protocol. This shows that the eSADI platform can be used for cross-border transactions and could work with various credentials and payment platforms in the future. eSADI is set to boost Ghana's payment system, encouraging growth and innovation and improving consumer experience. It could also help Ghanaian small and medium businesses to take part in international trade in a cost-effective manner. Now that we've come to stable coins, we cannot, of course, avoid crypto news from around the world. And the first thing is a question, rather. Were we wrong about the Bitcoin halving and its impact on Bitcoin prices? So Bitcoin's been on a bit of a roller coaster this last month. It hit like a record high of $74,000 mid-March, thanks to the surge of interest from new Bitcoin ETFs. But since then, it has fallen 0.7 in just the last 24 hours, down to a 60,000 range. You'd think the price would have propped up by the April 19th halving, where the number of new Bitcoins being created was cut in half. But JP Morgan strategist Nicholas, I cannot pronounce the rest of his name, thinks that that was already factored into the price. And this is something that I've written at depth in my FinTech newsletter as well. But anyways, JP Morgan reckons that Bitcoin's price is priced around $45,000 compared to gold. But don't worry, there is a silver lining. There are research analysts from Finequia International that point out that previous Bitcoin halvings led to price rise, but they've been after a delay. So we might see an upward trend in another 9 to 12 months. As for Ether, the second largest crypto, it's been down about 0.1% in the same 24 hours period to trading to about 3,000 per Ether. The SEC is expected to take a decision on Ether ETFs this month. But don't hold your breath for a quick follow-up to the Bitcoin ETF approvals that sent Bitcoin to its all-time highs. The market thinks the SEC will likely hold off on an approval due to concerns over Ether's liquidity and past classification as a security. By the way, smaller cryptos or altcoins have had a mixed day overall. Cardano was down, Polygon kind of off, and Dogecoin dipped again. Anyways, the crypto industry is rallying behind a bill called the FIT21, or Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century, that's heading for vote in the US House of Representatives. This bill could be a game changer for regulating digital assets in the US. Big names in crypto like Coinbase, Kraken are urging House leaders to pass the bill. If it goes through, it would set clear rules for how digital assets are regulated and protect consumers. Crypto industry sees this as the first crucial step for US leadership in financial innovation. Despite some opposition, there's hope that the bill will get enough support to pass through. And finally, we come to the top fintech recruiters of this week. First up, we have Incred, which is looking for product managers in their credit division. Myntra is also expanding their payments offering and needs a product director for the sale. So if you have card experience, cards and payments background, you should definitely apply. Then we have TransUnion Sybil, which is expanding their fintech sales team. JP Morgan Chase is looking for fintech product leaders for their deposit products in India. Upstocks, a fintech trading platform, is looking to hire for their product team as well. FlexiLoan is on the lookout for their next head of policy. Decentralized platform builder Chainlink Labs is looking out for a business head. And Razorpay wants someone to head their product design team. M2P Fintech is looking for software engineers to join their ranks. Setu has a bunch of open roles, for which many of the Setuzans are even willing to refer. That's it for this episode's weekly wrap of the FinTech Chronicler. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you again in the next episode. Bye and take care till then.